You feel it every time you open a heating bill and every time you leave the grocery store. Something has changed. This doesn't feel like the Canada you grew up in. The cold is the same. The winters are just as long. But we've forgotten how to get through them without handing a fortune to strangers. My grandfather heated a full house near Perth, Ontario, on less than a cord of wood a month, and never once feared a power outage. I spent almost 30 years paying other people for warmth and food my own family used to provide for nearly nothing. By the end of this, I'll hand you a fuel-saving method the Canada Food Board actually taught Canadian households in 1918 one that still works in the exact home you're sitting in right now. You don't need land. You don't need to start over. You just need what we quietly let slip away. Let me tell you how I figured out how badly I'd been fooled. It started with a cellar. Not a finished basement with a big screen and a bar fridge. A dirt floor cellar under my great-aunt's farmhouse, the kind that smelled of earth and apples all winter long. I remember being maybe 10 years old, going down those wooden steps with her, and seeing bins of carrots buried in damp sand, potatoes in wooden crates, and cabbages hanging upside down from the joists by their roots. I thought it was old-fashioned. I thought it was poverty. I was wrong on both counts, and it took me decades to understand just how wrong. Here's what nobody told me. That cellar was a machine. A machine with no moving parts, no electricity, and no monthly bill. It held a steady temperature between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius all winter, which happens to be the exact range that modern refrigeration engineers spend fortunes trying to hit. My great-aunt hit it for free, using nothing but the ground beneath her house and a little bit of forgotten knowledge. Root vegetables stored that way don't just survive, they get sweeter. Carrots and parsnips left in cold storage convert some of their starch into sugar as a natural defense against freezing. Farmers around here have known that for over 100 years. The parsnip you pull after the first hard frost tastes better than anything you'll ever buy in a plastic bag. She kept potatoes for 6 months, apples right through to spring. Onions, beets, turnips, cabbages, squash, a whole winter of eating, all sitting quietly under the kitchen floor while the snow piled up outside. And I want you to sit with the number, because it stopped me cold when I finally worked it out. A properly packed root cellar can hold 300 to 500 pounds of vegetables through an entire Canadian winter for a one-time cost of almost nothing. No compressor, no hydro, no trips to town in a blizzard. So why did we stop? Why did nearly every farmhouse in this country have a cellar like that, and now almost none do? That question is where the whole thing started to unravel for me. Because the answer isn't that root cellars stopped working. They work just as well today as they did in 1890. The answer is that somebody found it very profitable for us to forget them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before the cellar, there was the house itself, and the house is where the real theft happened. Here's something I never knew until an old-timer named Alf, a retired dairy farmer who lived down the road from me, explained it over a cup of tea one January afternoon. He asked me how much I spent heating my house that winter. When I told him, he just shook his head and said, "You're heating the outdoors, son." I didn't understand what he meant. Then he told me about banking. Before central heating, before spray foam and fiberglass bats, Canadian settlers had a problem that could kill you: the wind. A prairie farmhouse or an Ontario log home in January faced wind that stole heat straight through the walls and up through the floorboards. So they did something we've completely forgotten. Every fall, before the ground froze hard, they banked the house. They piled earth, straw, manure, spruce boughs, or fallen leaves against the entire base of the home, sometimes 2 or 3 feet high, all the way around the foundation. On the prairies, once the snow came, they packed snow up against the walls too, because dry snow is a genuine insulator. It traps still air, and still air is what stops heat from escaping. The Icelandic settlers who came to Manitoba in the 1870s were masters of this. They built with turf and banked their homes so tightly that a single small stove could keep a family alive through 40 below. The Ukrainian and Mennonite settlers who came a bit later did the same thing, and they wrote about it. Provincial agricultural records from that era describe banking as ordinary, expected fall work, right alongside splitting wood and putting up hay. Alf told me that banking a house could cut your heating needs by a quarter or more, and when I finally tried a version of it myself, I found out he was being modest. Here's how you do it, and you can do this on the house you own or rent right now, this coming fall, with no permit and no contractor. You take bales of straw, real straw, not hay, and you line them along the north and west sides of your foundation, the sides the wind hits hardest. You push them right up snug against the wall. Where you can't get straw, you rake your fallen leaves into bags and stack the bags along the base. When the snow comes, you shovel it up against that barrier instead of clearing it away. What you've just done is stop the wind from scouring heat out of your basement and your ground floor. The cold air can no longer get a running start at your walls. Your furnace runs less. Your pipes are less likely to freeze. And in spring, you pull the straw off, spread it on the garden, and it becomes mulch. That's it. That's the whole secret. It costs the price of a few straw bales, and it does silent work all winter long. Now here is where I got angry, and I think you're going to feel it too. When I started actually saving money with these old methods, I began asking a simple question. If this stuff works, and it's nearly free, why did I spend my entire adult life never hearing about any of it? I'm a Canadian. My people lived through these winters for generations. This knowledge should have been handed to me like a family recipe. Instead, I had to learn it from a dying breed of old-timers who were the last ones who remembered. Think about it honestly. There is no company on earth that makes money when you store your own carrots in sand. There's no quarterly earnings report that goes up when you bank your house with straw and burn a quarter less fuel. Every one of these old methods takes money out of somebody's pocket, the utility, the grocery chain, the appliance maker, and puts it back into yours. Starting in the 1950s and 60s, a new idea was sold to Canadian families. Hard. The idea was that self-reliance was backward. That doing things yourself was a sign you couldn't afford to do things the modern way. Convenience became a status symbol. The chest freezer in the basement replaced the root cellar. The furnace on a thermostat replaced the banked wall and the wood stove, and a whole generation, including me, was taught to be a little bit ashamed of the old ways. We didn't lose this knowledge by accident. We were gently, steadily encouraged to throw it away, because a self-reliant household is a terrible customer. A family that grows and stores its own food and heats efficiently with what's around them doesn't spend nearly enough to keep the machine happy. But here's the thing they didn't count on. The methods still exist. The old bulletins still exist. And a stubborn handful of rural Canadians never stopped using them, which means we can take them all back. Therefore, let me show you exactly how to rebuild that free refrigerator, even if you live in a townhouse or an apartment with no dirt cellar at all. Because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, this is lovely for a man with a farmhouse and a dirt basement. But I live in a bungalow from the 1970s, or a rented apartment, and I've got a concrete floor and a gas furnace. This part is for you, I mean that. Don't tune out, because what I learned next is the part that actually changed my monthly bills, and almost none of it requires you to own an acre of anything. You don't need a real root cellar to get root cellar results. What vegetables want is cold, dark, and a little bit of moisture. That's all. And every home in Canada has spots that provide exactly that, if you know where to look. Start with the coldest corner of your basement, the one on the north side, away from the furnace. The floor there sits against the earth, and it stays cool. Put a simple shelf in that corner, or set down a couple of wooden crates. Potatoes in a cardboard box with the lid loosely closed will keep for months there, as long as you keep them in the dark, because light turns them green and bitter. Do not store your potatoes and your onions right next to each other, though. The onions give off a gas that makes potatoes sprout faster. My great-aunt knew that. I had to learn it the hard way after ruining a whole box. No cool basement? Then use the space you're already ignoring. An unheated attached garage, a covered porch, a cold entryway, even the space between an inner and outer door. The old folks called that the cold porch, and it was where the winter's meat and butter used to sit. In much of this country, that transitional space hovers right around the perfect storage temperature for half the year, and you're not using it for anything. Here's a trick that stunned me with how well it worked. Take a clean plastic tote or an old cooler. Fill it with slightly damp sand or sawdust. Bury your carrots, beets, and parsnips in it so they don't touch each other, layer after layer. Set that tote in your coldest spot. The damp sand keeps them from drying out and shriveling, which is the one thing that ruins root vegetables in modern homes with dry, heated air. I pulled carrots out of a sand tote in March that were as crisp as the day I dug them. Try that with a bag from the store. And the more I dug, the clearer the answer became. Somebody profited from my forgetting. If you want the full picture, every method, every forgotten trick, every old bulletin reference gathered in one place, I put it all into a book. It's called Canadian Edge, and there's also a deeper edition called Canadian Complete, for those who want the whole system from root cellar to fireless cooker laid out step by step. You'll find the details in the description below. But the methods, the real ones, are all there, and that's exactly what we're going to keep pulling apart together. And for the apartment dwellers, hear me clearly. You can do a smaller version of this on an unheated balcony or in a cold closet against an outside wall. A single insulated tote of sand-packed vegetables on a Canadian balcony, protected from freezing solid, will outlast your fridge's crisper drawer 3 times over. None of this requires a renovation. None of it requires permission. It requires that you stop believing the only safe place for food is a machine that runs up your hydro bill every single hour of every single day. But cold storage only solves half the problem, because storing food raw is one thing. Cooking it without burning through expensive fuel is another. And that's where the single best trick I ever found comes in, the one from 1918 that I promised you at the start. Before I give it to you, I need you to understand why it was invented, because the story is what makes it real. It's 1918. Canada is in the final, desperate year of the First World War. Fuel is scarce. Coal is being rationed. Food is being shipped overseas to feed soldiers and allies, and the government has created something called the Canada Food Board, whose entire job is to help ordinary households do more with less. Waste in those years was treated almost like a crime against the country. The Food Board and the Household Science Departments of Canadian universities began promoting a device to save fuel in the kitchen. They called it the fireless cooker. Some people called it the hay box. And when I first read about it, I honestly could not believe something this simple had been allowed to disappear. Here is the entire idea. Most of the fuel you burn, cooking a pot of soup, a stew, a pot of beans, a batch of oatmeal, is not used to bring the food to a boil. It's used to keep it simmering for 1, 2, 3 hours after that. All that time, your stove is roaring away just to hold the pot at a temperature it already reached in the first 10 minutes. The fireless cooker asked a question nobody thinks to ask. What if you didn't keep burning fuel? What if you brought the pot to a full, rolling boil and then trapped that heat so completely that the food kept cooking itself? Here's how they did it. And here's how you can do it this very weekend with things already in your house. They took a wooden crate or a metal box and packed it thickly with insulation, hay, straw, crumpled newspaper, wool, whatever held still air. They cut out a nest in the middle just big enough for the cooking pot. You bring your stew to a hard boil on the stove for 10 or 15 minutes. Then you clamp the lid on tight, rush it into the insulated nest, pack more insulation over the top, and close the box. And then you walk away. For hours. The food inside stays above the temperature it needs to keep cooking, slowly, gently, using nothing but the heat you already put into it. You come back 4 or 5 hours later to a stew that's fully cooked, tender, and hot, and your stove was off the entire time. You used maybe a fifth of the fuel you normally would. The old records claimed fuel savings of up to 80% on long-simmered dishes, and every modern person who has tried it reports the same astonishing thing. It just works. A pot of dried beans, brought to a boil and left in a well-insulated box, comes out perfectly cooked by supper. Oatmeal put in at night is hot and ready at breakfast. Tough, cheap cuts of meat turn meltingly tender, because low and slow is exactly how you cook them anyway. You can build one today for nothing. Take a cooler you already own, or a cardboard box lined with an old wool blanket. Get your pot boiling hard on the stove. Wrap the hot pot in a couple of thick towels or a blanket, tuck it deep into the cooler, stuff more towels around and over it until there's no air gap at all, and shut the lid. That's a fireless cooker. That's the exact principle the Canada Food Board taught frightened, rationed households more than 100 years ago, sitting right there in your kitchen. Think about what this means in a power outage, too. If the electricity goes out in an ice storm and you can get one pot to a boil on a camp stove or a wood stove or a barbecue, you can cook a full meal with almost no fuel and keep it hot for hours. This isn't a quaint hobby. This is resilience. This is the difference between depending on a fragile system and being able to take care of your own. And here's the part that got me. This method was never disproven. It was never found to be unsafe. It was never improved upon and retired. It simply became inconvenient to the people selling energy and appliances, so it was allowed to fade out of the cookbooks and out of our memory. One generation used it to survive a world war. The next generation was taught it was embarrassing. And by my generation, it was gone completely, except in the memories of a few old-timers and the pages of a few forgotten government bulletins. That's the pattern. Every single one of these methods follows it. The root cellar, the banked house, the fireless cooker. Each one was real, proven, and nearly free. Each one was quietly replaced by something you have to pay for, month after month, forever. And each one was kept alive by stubborn rural Canadians who never got the message that they were supposed to be ashamed. Let me tie it all together, because when you put these three things in one house, something powerful happens. Picture your home this coming winter. Your foundation is banked with straw on the wind side, so your furnace runs less and your bills drop. Your coldest corner holds a tote of carrots and beets buried in damp sand, and boxes of potatoes and squash and apples, all keeping for months without touching your hydro. And on the stove, you bring one pot of stew to a boil, tuck it into an insulated box, and let it finish cooking itself while you go about your day. You have just recreated in a modern Canadian home the quiet self-reliance that our great-grandparents took completely for granted. You've pulled money back out of 3 different systems that were counting on you never learning this. And you've done it with straw bales, a plastic tote of sand, and an old cooler. That's what my great-aunt's generation knew in their bones. That's what Alf tried to tell me over that cup of tea when he said I was heating the outdoors. It took me half a lifetime and a lot of wasted money to finally listen. I think about that dirt cellar all the time now. I used to see it as a symbol of the past, of hard times, of a Canada that was poorer and smaller. I see it completely differently today. I see a family that couldn't be squeezed, a family that couldn't be frightened by a power outage or a price spike or an empty shelf because their winter was already sitting safe under their own floor. That's the Canada that feels like it's slipping away. Not the weather, not the land, the independence, the quiet confidence of people who knew how to take care of themselves and didn't need permission or a subscription to do it. But here's what I've come to believe, and it's why I'm telling you all this, that Canada isn't gone. It was never destroyed. It was just misplaced, tucked away in the memories of old farmers and the pages of 100-year-old bulletins, waiting for someone stubborn enough to go looking. The knowledge survived, and now it's yours again. You are exactly the kind of person this was buried from. Someone who suspects, deep down, that the modern way costs far more than it should, and that plenty of what we call progress was really just a very good way to sell us things our grandparents got for free. You were right to be suspicious. Trust that instinct. It's the same instinct that kept these methods alive in the corners of this country where the machine couldn't quite reach. So here's what I want from you. And I'm asking you directly, because I know this crowd doesn't speak up unless you're invited to. Tell me about the cold porch, or the cellar, or the cooking trick from your own family? Did someone in your life bank the house, or pack carrots in sand, or keep butter in a cold entryway all winter? Did a parent or grandparent have a method the rest of us have forgotten? Leave it in the comments below. Write it down where the next person can find it, because that comment section is becoming the new root cellar, a place where we store this knowledge so it can't be taken again. And if you feel that pull, that sense that you want the whole toolkit back, then come along with me. Subscribing to this channel isn't about supporting me. It's about joining a growing number of Canadians who are quietly reclaiming what was ours all along, one forgotten method at a time. Because next time, I'm going to show you the old way rural families kept meat and butter safe through the summer heat with no electricity at all, a cold storage trick that used nothing but running water and the temperature of the earth, and that big appliance makers were more than happy to see us forget. It kept food fresh for generations, and once you see how it works, you'll wonder why every home in this country doesn't still have one. The cold is coming either way. The only question is whether you meet it the way they taught us to, dependent and paying for every degree of warmth, or the way your great-grandparents did, warm and stocked and quietly unafraid. I know which Canada I want back. I think you do too. So this weekend, boil one pot, wrap it up tight, and tuck it away. Come back in a few hours and taste for yourself the thing we were never supposed to remember. This video gave you the overview, but there's so much more I couldn't fit. Inside the Northern Ways circle, I pick up right where we left off. Ask me your own questions, and a real person, me and my team, answers you. And you're not alone. Folks like you are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen, and you can cancel anytime. No risk at all.